Maddie Clifton. With her kool-aid-stained smile and interspersed freckles, the 8-year-old girl you see in this picture had her whole life ahead of her. After not returning home from going out to play with the neighbors and being reported missing by her mother, a search for the beloved little girl began, only for the nation to find out the chilling truth behind what really happened to her. This video contains details of violence and brutal execution that may be disturbing for some individuals. Therefore, viewer discretion is advised. On November 3rd, Sheila Clifton had returned from voting when she had seen her little girl, a tomboy with a love for basketball, as joyful as ever, playing outside their house. At 6:30 p.m., Sheila Clifton had called Maddie and her 11-year-old sister Jessie in for dinner, but Jessie came in and said she hadn't been with her younger sister. When Maddie was nowhere to be found, her mother called 911 and frantically told the operator how she had shut the door and it was like Maddie had vanished off the face of the earth. Sheila Clifton was a mother terrified for her child's safety. That night, the Cliftons and other neighbors who lived across the street began their search using flashlights to look for Maddie. Over the next 7 days, thousands of volunteers searched to look for the 8-year-old girl who had mysteriously disappeared. Before her disappearance, Maddie was last seen with Phillips' son, Joshua Phillips, who Maddie would often play with. She was last seen wearing a red YMCA shirt with her name written on the back. A reward of $50,000 was offered by the Clifton family for anyone who would be able to find Maddie. The first suspect identified for Maddie's disappearance was a man who had been accused of involvement in an assault case 15 to 20 years earlier. However, the man had an alibi for when Maddie disappeared, and he was cleared of any suspicion. The last person to see Maddie was Joshua Phillips, her friend and playmate, who was devastated after her disappearance. He helped the Cliftons display missing posters and searched along with the thousands of volunteers. Joshua Phillips was an unsuspecting, friendly kid who, on the surface, seemed like a 14-year-old who had lost a playmate. But the truth was that this 14-year-old boy had a terrible, dark secret. 7 days after the disappearance of Maddie Clifton, Joshua's mother, Missy Phillips, noticed some water on the floor next to her son's waterbed and thought that the leaking water may be the cause of the strange smell that seemed to be coming from his room. She pulled apart the baseboard to check under his bed, and what she saw left her in absolute disbelief. A foot sticking out from under her son's bed. Missy Phillips ran out her front door and asked a police officer to check her son's room, as she could not bear to investigate further. She said, "I just pointed to where they needed to look. I couldn't even go in." The police discovered that the feet sticking out from under Josh's bed belonged to Maddie. They also found that tape had been used to keep the bed frame together, and a baseball bat was hidden under the dresser. A knife was also stashed in the room, along with a bunch of air fresheners and freshly burned incense on his nightstand. As you might have guessed, the reason for the air fresheners was to cover the smell of Maddie's decomposing corpse. The autopsy revealed that Maddie had been struck 3 times in the head and that Josh's baseball bat had been used as a weapon. Her throat had also been cut with the knife from Josh's room, and she was stabbed 7 to 9 times in the chest, though some sources put that number as high as 11 times. She'd also been wearing shorts and underwear that she was no longer wearing when her body was found. The police put up caution tape around the Phillips house while the Cliftons watched from across the street. A few moments later, the police knocked on their door to break the horrifying news. As you could imagine, the Phillips were in shock at the chilling discovery. They met their son at the police station after he was brought in from his school, where his father, Steve Phillips, told his son to tell the truth about what happened to Maddie. This is where Josh Phillips first revealed his side of the story. But a lot of things didn't quite add up. He told the police that Maddie had come to his place and asked to play baseball with him, but Josh declined, saying he had chores to do. When Maddie kept insisting, he agreed despite knowing he wasn't allowed to play with friends or let anyone into the house when his parents were not home. He claimed that while playing baseball with Maddie around 5:15 p.m., she threw the ball and Josh hit it, but it hit her eye, resulting in a huge gash that bled continuously. He reported that Maddie fell down and started to scream. Panicking, Josh took her inside and into his bedroom, putting her on the floor. When she screamed even more, Josh claimed that his main concern was his parents coming home and hearing her screams. You would expect Josh to report the injury and get the poor girl help, right? Well, what Josh did next will send chills down your spine. Josh said he panicked and, to silence her, used the baseball bat to strike her in the head multiple times. After his father came home, Josh realized that Maddie was still making noise and decided to silence her once and for all. Using his pocket knife, he stabbed her in the throat and chest. What the entire nation found perhaps the most disturbing about this case was the prospect of Joshua sleeping on his bed while Maddie's body was hidden underneath it. And indeed he had. For a whole week. 14-year-old Joshua Phillips was arrested and taken into custody. It was a horrifying revelation. A boy that distributed missing posters along with the other neighbors and was someone Maddie trusted ended up being the person who took her life. He was a friendly, quiet child who did not seem to those who knew him as someone who could end up doing something so heinous. His mother, Missy Phillips, said, "That's not the way he is. He would never hurt anybody." Joshua Phillips, in his account, mentioned how he had to do what he did because of his father's strict attitude towards Joshua having friends over when his parents were not at home. Joshua's mother also recounted that her husband especially tended to not like little girls, and that she and her son would walk on eggshells around him. However, Steve Phillips would not live to tell his side of the story. In 2002, he sadly passed away in a car crash. When the case went to trial, Josh was tried as an adult, and Josh's defense argued that the whole ordeal began as an accident and escalated due to panic that bordered on madness. But Joshua's story had holes, and the prosecution wasn't buying it. Firstly, Joshua had suggested that a ball had hit Maddie in the face, causing her to bleed and fall to the ground. However, the autopsy showed that there was no sign of bruising on her face. Secondly, when Maddie was last seen, she had been wearing shorts. But when she was found, she had only her shirt and socks on. Joshua's explanation for this was that he had dragged Maddie into his house, which had led her to losing her shorts and underwear. But upon inspection, there was no dirt on her. No blood was found outside the Phillips residence either. Blood was only found in Joshua's room. The trial lasted for 3 days, and the jury found Joshua Phillips guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. He could not receive the death penalty as he was still under the age of 16. While in prison, Joshua Phillips grew from a 14-year-old child to an adult. In 2017, the case was resentenced, and more frightening details were revealed. It was revealed that Joshua had books about cult subjects in his room. He was also watching adult content on his computer that was violent in nature and could have involved underage girls. What was even more disturbing is that a picture of Maddie's older sister, 11-year-old Jessie, was found in Joshua's room, hinting at the possibility that Joshua had been obsessing over Jessie, but took the chance to do the terrible things he had been fantasizing about to poor Maddie instead. As you can probably tell, 14-year-old Joshua Phillips was a truly wicked and devilish child. After having spent 25 years in prison, Joshua will be resentenced in 2023. Let us hope that little Maddie is given justice and that the heart-wrenching end to her life is never forgotten. What are your thoughts on this case?